Okay, so hydrogen fuel cells. So let's go ahead and let me first of all get the slide show up and running here. And then the first thing I want to say about hydrogen fuel cells is that we're going to talk a little bit about how these work, but you don't need to memorize like all the chemistry and physics that are involved with this. Much like other resources that we've been talking about, what you really need to understand are, the impacts, kind of what they are in general, and then the impacts, both pros and cons, and then understand how like calculations are a big part of this unit. So that's something that we'll really focus on as well. But let's go ahead and jump into the basics with hydrogen fuel cells. So hydrogen is a renewable alternative fuel source to fossil fuels. Basically, hydrogen fuel is H2 gas um, that is given, or we use hydrogen, all right, the element hydrogen, we use that gas. And then oxygen, those are the two things that we put into the fuel cell. So we use that oxygen to like burn the hydrogen gas. And then what's given off as a result is H2O, water. And so that's your waste product, which is actually, to have water given off as the waste product is phenomenal. And so, but there's a lot of cons with using this as well. But basically, hydrogen gas enters the fuel cell. And so, one con with that is that, yeah, but hydrogen gas is extremely, explosive and flammable. But that's true with gasoline too. So, I don't necessarily see that as a con. One of the issues is that it's not readily available. And so we have to create technologies to make it so that it's readily available. This could be a serious, like, alternative to fuel, like the typical fuel that we use now in cars, the gasoline or oil-based fuel that we're using at this point. So, but basically what happens is that the hydrogen gas enters the fuel cell. So we can kind of see that here. Hydrogen comes in over here, and then it is split into protons and electrons. And so electrons are going to be what create that electrical current. And when we put in the oxygen, um, basically we have this electrolyte membrane that only lets the protons flow through, and so the electrons are going to that's going to drive those electrons to like move around. Okay, and that's where we're going to generate the electricity from. Electrons take this alternative route. Instead of moving through this membrane, they're going to generate this electrical current. And then when the oxygen molecules enter the fuel cell, they're going to break apart into individual oxygen atoms. They're going to combine with these two hydrogen atoms, creating that H2O. Okay. And so that's the only emission that's going to come off from this should say a hydrogen fuel cell, and F, that should be an H right there, is basically water, which is like super nice. So the most common application for this is in vehicles, and that is what we would use it for. Like instead of using gasoline, it basically replaces it. It's Gasoline's not renewable. It releases lots of greenhouse gases. It releases lots of particulate matter. And with hydrogen fuel, there's no air pollutants released. The only thing that's coming off is water vapor. So that is just like incredible to think about the future of where this could go. So the key challenge to creating, like, why are we not just creating this like crazy right now and just putting this in all cars? Because basically, pure hydrogen gas doesn't exist. It's not a natural thing. We have to man make it. So we have to separate the H2 gas from other molecules, and we could separate it from like water. We could separate it from methane. That process is pretty energy intensive at this point. The two main processes are steam reforming. So basically, 95% of all H2 gas that we produce right now comes from steam. And then electrolysis, which is where we use electricity. It's less common, but it would be more sustainable. Like we could even use solar power or hydropower to create that electricity to use electricity to separate the water molecule. That would be amazing if we could do that. So steam reforming is essentially where we take nitrogen gas or natural gas, which is methane, CH4, and we use steam to separate the H2 gas um, from the um, um, separate the hydrogen gas from the methane. All right. And so the problem with this is that it emits carbon. Oops, I did not mean to click that button yet. Click that by accident. It emits carbon dioxide and it requires natural gas or fossil fuel input. All right. So the steam reforming is not something that I see as like the best alternative. That's why I think electrolysis would be amazing because we could use non or we could use renewable resources to create the electricity that we need to separate, like a water molecule. That would be amazing if we could do that. So electrolysis is basically just like I said, electrical currents applied to water. It breaks it into O2 and H2 gas. There's no CO2 emission, but it does require electricity. So how do we do that? The other thing is or like the pros that we have, because hydrogen gas can be stored in pressurized tanks. It can be transported for use and can be shipped everywhere, and the electricity can be created later in a different location. So that would be really nice. We already have a pressurized tanks that we're moving around with lots of things in it already, so we could just add that to the list of things that we're moving. Unlike solar, hydro, and wind, where the electricity must be used soon, as soon as it's generated, and relatively close to the location of generation, we can move this around in small tanks. It can also be used as a fuel for vehicles, which replaces gasoline. Like that's a huge pro. Or we can use it to create ammonia for fertilizer. Ammonia's formula, like the formula for water is H2O, the formula for ammonia is H2O2. Um, so it could be moved. Oh, wait, no, it's not. Ammonia. I am sorry. That's hydrogen peroxide. I was wrong. The formula for ammonia is NH4. So we could use that, to create ammonia for fertilizer as well. And so that would be a huge benefit for us. It can be used as a gasoline replacement, emits no air pollutants. I've already mentioned that. We can also create many different industrial chemicals with this. So there's lots of reasons to actually create hydrogen. It can be stored as a liquid or a gas, making it easy to transport, like we said. And then fuel cells are 80% efficient in converting chemical energy. Coal, if you recall, is only 35% efficient. So it's much, much, much more efficient than using any other fossil fuel. So that's beneficial. Drawbacks. What are our drawbacks? Since 95% of hydrogen production requires methane, fuel cells are based on a non-renewable process right now, and CO2 releasing energy source. However, if we used the water molecule, that would be more renewable. But we've already talked about having issues with water in some areas, so we'd have to consider that as well. That could be another unintended consequence that we'd have to look at. If electrolysis is used, it's only as sustainable as the electricity source that we're using. So again, using solar or wind or something else would be needed. If we have widespread hydrogen fuel cell usage, it would require building a widespread like infrastructure of hydrogen for hydrogen fuel cells. Okay, so or for hydrogen production, basically, and for distribution. Our world is built on an oil distribution system, so that would have to be, turned into a hydrogen distribution system. But it could be done. These are all things that are doable. We just need to invest and look into the possibilities. And, there are people that are looking into this already. So that's a good thing. Hydrogen fuel can be stored in gas form in vehicles, but unfortunately, it would require larger tanks than our current gasoline tanks. So that is a problem. Um, So that's one thing to consider. So looking at all of those pros and cons, um, that is could be a viable solution for our future, and we'll see what happens when we have these chemical engineers and folks figuring these things out for us in the future. That, or some of you might decide to go into that as a career, which would be a good option because that's going to be a really promising field. All right, so practice FRQ for this section is explain how hydrogen gas can be used to generate electricity. Next, we're going to be talking about wind energy, and then we just have 6.13 energy conservation, and we'll be done with this unit. So I'll see you guys soon.